God, somebody said something, you probably heard it. They're like, I went to the supermarket and there was a health food section. And it made me wonder, what the heck is all the other section? What are they? Are they not healthy?
Right. Right.
So, as I said earlier, I'm apolitical to the degree that I can be. I do have, and I'm a little naive by nature, but I do feel like essentially, or not essentially, but very much in this country, the financial interests associated with sickness and the profit associated with sickness is massive.
What if the journey to personal health was less about avoiding disease and more about reclaiming agency? Today's guest, Dr. Stephen Bennett, is proof that the best guides are those who have walked the winding path themselves. An engineer who found his true calling in biochemistry and functional medicine, Dr. Bennett transformed his own professional life to help others understand the root cause of metabolic disease. Now at the helm of Cardiometabolic, patient empowerment is key. He's pioneering accessible, data-driven testing that bridges the gap between clinical rigor and patient empowerment. His mission is clear: equip people with the tools and understanding they need to become experts in their own bodies. In this conversation, we'll trace the arc of a career defined by a curiosity, compassion, and a relentless drive to make health personal, actionable, and sustainable. Founder of Cardiometabolic has developed an advanced at-home dry blood spot test to provide comprehensive assessment of cardiovascular, metabolic, and liver health, as we'll dive into today. His work bridges the gap between traditional blood testing and proactive patient-driven health insights, empowering individuals and practitioners with data-driven solutions. As I mentioned, background in engineering, functional medicine, BD, business development. Dr. Bennett's career, his journey has, been shaped by a passion for preventing chronic disease like diabetes, type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome. And he's been instrumental in even launching his own precision nutritional supplement programs, including those aimed at and science-backed protocols aimed at solution for fatty liver. Dr. Bennett is currently focused on integrating nutrigenomics into functional medicine, aiming to personalize cardiometabolic treatment strategies with DNA insights. And his work is helping redefine a practitioner's approach, preventative health and metabolic disease management, ensuring affordable, accessible, and actionable solutions for long-term well-being. That is a mouthful. Dr. Bennett, thank you for joining me on the DNA Update.
Hey, thank you, Jeremy. And kudos, doing that from memory had to be difficult. So nice job.
Well, I can't pretend that's exactly to have two hours, but thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, I am delighted to be here. I've spoken with you a few times, and each time I've really enjoyed the process because, as you said a little while ago, just freestyling and thinking with another mind that's ultra curious is really very satisfying for people like me and you. And you said something else that was fascinating. Once you've acquired a certain level of understanding for a subject, you can speak at will about it, and it just flows. My wife hears me flow all the time, and she said it just comes out of you like water. And I have to say, it's a joy to be able to do that about a subject that matters. And there's, I know you know this term in Japanese, it's called ikigai. Yeah, right? And so that's what it feels like. I didn't get that feeling until my 50s, actually, which is, yeah. And that's probably why I'm smiling so much, is when you've worked and waited for something so long, you really delight in its arrival. And so I love what I'm doing, and I honor the path that got me here. Although at times it was very unclear where it was leading. I think there's a lesson there. I'm 60 years old, and I'm happier and more engaged and more excited than I've ever been about my career, which is, most people are downshifting into retirement at this age. And I think we're at a point where we're living to 90 if we're doing some of the right things right. And we want to be healthy till 89.75, right? So anyway, I'm tickled to be with you. I am eager to chat, and let's take it away.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned the Ikigai. It's like a 4-circle Venn diagram, right? And
Right.
Yeah, that kind of that disrupted my own paradigm of three. I still haven't quite figured out how to resolve it, but we can come back to that because, but really, what that's foreshadowing, I think that we may or may not get there. Just you with your, engineering background. I worked with a lot of, engineers. You're a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mechanical.
Right. And so, there's this kind of like love and reverence for systems.
Yes.
And, one of my really good friends, I do love him. His name's Brandon Larson. He's currently at NASA. I met him when he was at Red Bull when I was doing the high performance DNA stuff with athletes. And anyway, he became a dad like us. And one of the things he noticed is there wasn't resources, or at least there weren't resources, kind of resources he was looking for as a dad. And what he was really looking for was give me something in terms of human development and a playbook that dads can look at to kind of, provide that coach's eye and support. And it's not a parenting book per se, but it's a playbook for human development, first principles in human development, how to be a good dad. Whatever that is, that's a whole other conversation. But right. Brandon and I, we have this ongoing conversation where, it's like, oh, it's a paradigm shift. And, you kind of keep cycling up these paradigm shifts. And maybe one day we'll get to the ultimate paradigm that there are, in fact, paradigms at all. Maybe there are none, right? I mean, didn't our whole, notion of the Big Bang Theory just kind of collapse on its own work recently?
Yeah.
Anyway, like I said, not to get too metaphysical, right?
No.
But, yeah, there is this kind of love of dialogue and conversation, and this emergence of these kind of longer form discussions are great. And for folks that don't have time, the insights that we get to, we can, chop those up and share them, because I think there's some real gems that could come out of the riffs we have here. So yeah, let's dive in. I mean, let's start with, you're 60 and just getting started. Reminds me of a story about Colonel Sanders, right? And KFC.
Right.
Except you're selling the antidote maybe to KFC. So,
although probably his original recipe was probably nowhere near as toxic as the current recipe, but
it was probably on real stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's go ahead.
Sorry. No, please.
Well, no, it's funny. I just turned 60 in November, and like you'll realize as you get a little further down the road, you still feel 29 pretty much the whole time, except there's more aches and pains. But I was looking back, and as I said, the path was circuitous and winding. And I was trying to figure out when I first had a sense that, we might be onto something here. And it started in 2019, 2020, when one of the supplements that you mentioned earlier came out with a really nice clinical trial in type 2 diabetics. 75% of type 2 diabetics have fatty liver, and fatty liver makes diabetes worse. 65% of diabetics have heart disease. It makes that worse. So it's this vicious cycle. And I learned something fascinating. Supplements, the right supplements in general, or nature in general, when they use this ingredient or these ingredients in diabetics, the response was really significant. When they use it in non-diabetics that were overweight, obese, not in good health, but they weren't diabetic, they still got a response, but it was not as dramatic. And I find that to be fascinating, that the worse you are, the more help nature will give you. Oftentimes, it's almost, adaptogenic. It adapts to the need, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on something there where we're in a place now where, well, heck, that we even know what type 2 diabetes is, right? Because we didn't always. But the point is, you can, well, for better or worse, at this moment, you can look at, let's just focus on folks in the U.S. is, you can look at and you can see the varying comorbidities that exist, and not everybody has the same combination of them, right?
Right.
And I think that, I have always looked at that. Like I said, there's 3 Venn diagram circles, right? So feel free to disrupt me, but I think of it as, you've got the genetics, right? You've got, so that's what, let's say you're endowed with. You've got your environment where you happen to find yourself. And then you've got the behavioral component, and that's in effect the one that's in your control, depending on whether or not you believe on free will, or that you've gone too far, or in a severe instance or circumstance. But the point is you can look at, like we were talking about polygenic risk scores the other day as an example, and all this incredible research that's been done, where you can actually, say you take a look at the top 10 suspects in, comorbidities, let's say, starting with cardiovascular, going all the way down to type 2 diabetes, let's say everything in between, like, Alzheimer's, arthritis, et cetera. And you can look at, well, okay, here's my genetic vulnerability. And so having that information, number one, it makes it, highly personal, I think. And I think you could even then, because you get to see that data, depending on the, the access to the care team that you have, but you can start to look at it in, partnership and actually have become participatory, because not everybody is presenting with the same issue. I look at this like a landscape of like a mountain range, let's say. My mountain range is different than yours. The peaks in my life that I'm to climb are going to be different than yours, for, those three things coming together. And I look back at like health history and family health history. Doc will say, well, what's your family health history? It's like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean at the DNA level? Do you mean because where my father happened to find himself, or because of the dumb stuff he was doing? Right. So we're at a point where we can tease that all out. And, I think it's really interesting talking to, somebody with the engineering mind that you have, because you bring a very interesting perspective to it. And before we kind of dive in specifically to, where metabolic is and where is it going, how did you get from engineer, mechanical to, let's say, well, biological, maybe not an engineer, but definitely enabler. How did that transition happen for you?
Well, you're going to love this story. By the time I was an engineer, I knew I didn't want to be an engineer. So in the traditional sense, right? So my first job was a systems engineer, and that one was kind of HVAC and stuff like that. I only did that for a year because I just was dying inside. So I got this job as a business development engineer in a company that makes pharmaceutical process equipment. So big, large centrifuges, think 5 foot in diameter, spinning at 800 Gs to synthesize and dewater and desolvent drugs. And that led me kind of into pharma and biotech. But the moment it really shifted was I over-interviewed. I don't know if you've ever done this, but there was a company called Transgenomic, and they were one of the first to develop a relatively small SNP detection system back in the early 2000s. It's called the Wave. I don't know what they're doing now, but I went and I interviewed, and this guy was this large man from Ghana, Dr. Akoto, and he had a PhD in biochemistry. And I managed to get the job. Now, the job was selling oligonucleotides and protein purification systems to PhD biochemists. And so I was so far over my head, I just dove into learning biochemistry, right? And protein purification and all that stuff. And the more I dug, the more I was like, oh my God, this is what I should have done in my undergrad, because I love this. It's engineering for the body, right? Biochemistry, in my impression. And you're engineering the most elegant system that is or will ever be created. So that's where the engineering and the biology kind of come together, as biochemistry and molecular biology, right? And I adore that science. I don't know why, I just do. And then when you connect it to human suffering, that's when it becomes powerful, right? If you could help one person not suffer, that's worth it, right? So the genesis of cardiometabolic happened in 2020 when I started digging into fatty liver disease. It's called NAFLD or MAFLD, metabolic associated fatty liver disease, because I had a nutrient that was really good at dealing with it. And I read this paper that said this disease is going to cost us $1 trillion a year within a decade. And they said, you think diabetes is bad? Wait for fatty liver and wait to see what that's going to happen. Because a liver transplant is about $1 million, and there's not enough livers, right? Not that fatty liver goes to cirrhosis and liver transplant all the time, but along the way, it causes havoc with cardiovascular disease and metabolic disease. So I went from wanting to develop a test to tease out fatty liver in the population to learning about this massive cardiometabolic issue. And there's a paper in 2018 by Dr. O'Hearn that stated 93.2% of all US adults are suboptimally cardiometabolic. Their cardiometabolic health is suboptimal. That's almost everybody, right? 93.2%.
Yeah.
So I went from saying I wanted to do fatty liver because I have a great supplement to saying, why don't we make a great cardiometabolic test so people can know what's going on? Because as you know, in Western medicine, there's that effect of siloing, right? You go to an endocrinologist to manage your diabetes. You go to a cardiologist to manage heart disease, which is simply diabetes unattended, right? And you go to a hepatologist for your liver. There should be one doc that's managing that whole circus because it's all playing together, right? And so when a patient goes in for their annual physical and they get the standard blood panel, I call it skimming for red flags because, yeah, if something's really wrong, you're going to see it. But a standard blood panel with a metabolic panel, a CBC, and a lipid panel, really, unless you have somebody to tease out what it really means and to kind of weave the story, the patient walks out of there thinking, well, I'm not dying and I'll be back next year.
Yeah.
Right. And we are dying. It's just really slow. Right.
Yeah. You know, this notion of like one doc or you know, somebody who's kind of, I don't know what it is, if they're running, you know, diligence, or I wouldn't give them the full, you know, kind of authority or autonomy. I wouldn't delegate my authority to say you're going to be the architect of my health, because I had an amazing track coach. You know, I did, you know, sometimes I think I just did academia so that I could be a pseudo professional athlete, because I love track and field. I love the power, precision, and sprinting, and I had a great coach. In fact, actually, the deciding factor for where I did my postdoc happened to be Cornell, which was awesome. But I remember meeting with the track coach there, and I said, hey, if I come here to do my postdoc, can I train with the team? And he's like, yeah, for sure. And so anyway, I tell you that because I met my track coach. Oh gosh, it was towards the end of my undergrad. But I did my PhD at the same university. I did my undergrad, so spent a lot of time with Garnet. And Garnet, you know, he was this, when I met him, he was a 70-year-old Trinidadian guru. That, I mean, he just had a way, right? I was a walk-on, I should say. And, you know, I did the 60. I made both swimming and track teams, and I thought I could catch up more with track than swimming. And I think I turned out to be right, only because of Garnet, because he took me being ranked 700th in the country to being ranked 7th in the country.
Wow.
In 3 months. And I'll tell you, one of the things that he said to me that I'll never forget was, Jeremy, we're all wearing different bodies. That's number one. And then number two is, you're the expert in your own body, right? So when I think about, okay, you know, I want somebody there who's kind of an observer and can like see what I don't see, and kind of be more of like a, I don't know if it's a co-pilot. I don't quite know what it is, but I know we're right there on the precipice of this day and age of like LLMs, right? So these large language models that are going to be, well, I mean, so first of all, I suppose they should be focused on your individual data, but see, every practitioner, they have a different frame to right? So it's like, well, look at it with this filter, and then look at it with that filter. And so it's really like tempting to be like, oh, just put all your data in an LLM and you'll be okay. It's like, no, that's not quite it, because you got to know what questions to ask, and what you're looking for is going to dictate that. So you know, it's a real problem. You know, I look for, okay, what's the incremental steps to improving and giving better care using these things like, you know, better testing and better interpretation, and then, you know, maybe accelerating certain things or deepening conversations because of these better tools. But, you know, just from an engineer's perspective, I guess number one, would be really, you know, interesting to learn your thoughts on that generally. But I think there's more to it, because we were introduced by Ryan from Avexia, right? And you know, you launched with them earlier this year, and you've seen some exciting results, because your test is mainly for, I think, practitioners. You as a functional med doc are like, okay, well, here's what I've experienced as a functional med doc, and here's what makes my job easier. But then you've like got to play nice with all these other tests. So I think where my question is something around, how does this cardiometabolic health not only help functional med docs, but how does it play nice with the other tests? How does it complement that? And well, I already know you're thinking about it because you're already thinking about DNA. So what are your thoughts on, I mean, dare I say holistic, moving us in even more in the direction of systems?
Yeah, great question. And I think I understand what you're asking me. So if I don't give you the answer that makes sense, then ask me again. But two things I wanted to get out was that I've gone over reports, lab reports with hundreds, if not thousands of patients, right? And my job, which I was happy to do, was to bring it to life, right? Here's 2 pages of numbers, and this is what it means.
Right.
And while I'm sitting knee to knee with a patient, they love it. They are engaged. I'm telling stories, and it's really great. And the moment they leave, 90% of that information evaporates in their field of knowledge, or I don't know what percent, but a lot, right? So one of the things that I did when I created the report, which is 12 pages, was to make it kind of a hybrid, meaning if you didn't have time to sit with a patient, you could give them this report and they would glean a significant chunk of the value. It's written in a way that a layperson can sit down and look at it and get a lot of value. But the flip side is it's also written in a way that a functional medicine practitioner or anybody can, if they know physiology and they know disease and they know, various things, can really bring it even further to life, which is what we do, right? That's why people pay for our time, is to translate numbers into reality for them. So apropos of being your own doctor, I want to honor that by making a report that you could just send to somebody and they'd get value and they'd have a resource they could look at and say, oh, what are the 10 things that I could do for free to make things better? It's in the report on page 2, right? And I can also take this to my MD because I took pains to make it palatable, or a traditional primary care physician could look at this and make sense of the tabular data, right? It's not like, what is this test you're bringing me, right? I'm gonna dismiss it because I don't know it, and I'm gonna poo-poo it because I don't want to look silly. So I tried to really bridge the gaps so that it would be highly valuable, even if it was direct to consumer, which is the way I originally thought about launching it. But I realized that it was too much to be direct to consumer. It does benefit from having interpretation and guidance. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, and I think it made me think of something else because I've chatted with a few functional med docs now, and I always make the point to say, well, what is a functional med doc? And I'll just say it back to you so you tell me if I get it wrong, because I'm coming in with the frame where it's like, well, it's functional and integrative medicine, but the aim is getting at the root cause.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So then that's the whole participatory thing, right? So the more that the patient can actually give you their objective experience, like that, you're wearing your own body and you know it better, right? It's like, how you got those grass stains on your knee, right?
Right.
That time when you were, well, when you pulled your hamstring, or, you knew that time when you were living in that basement with mold. And so then it does become conversational, and it's not so much about the symptoms. It's about whether like a true, not just medical history, but like a whole natural history, I think. And so the way that you describe the report is really interesting because it really lends itself to the consultation is not just a consultation, it's a conversation. Because like, put another way, like I worked with a lot of professional athletes. Sometimes those professional athletes would get, injuries, acute injuries, like, I had one client whose knee exploded from an injury. So, I worked with him and basically ended up seemed to be more of like an advocate to the athlete because, you'd go in and the athlete's in trauma, post-op, still kind of groggy from the anesthetics and not really in a place where, well, heck, they play hockey. They don't know biology. And so they can't really advocate for themselves. And so it's just really interesting where you've got this different centers of excellence around patient care, let's say, and obviously, like each instance is different, like an acute injury versus a chronic injury. And I've worked with a lot of the rare disease community now as well. And there is kind of this emergent, again, paradigm of centers of excellence plus data plus ongoing conversation, right? So I think what I'm saying is on the other side of, my, let's say, GP rolling his eyes because I'm coming in from questions with WebMD, right? So it's worse than that now, because now I'm coming in with questions from ChatGPT. Plus, I have my whole genome analysis, and so I guess the other question that I asked is like, well, how does your test play nice with other forms of analysis? Is like, well, because these are all different ways of measuring. These are all different filters, right? So, it's interesting because each functional med doc, say they're focused on the fatty liver disease, or they're focused on chronic pain. Like who knows, right? There's a certain level of value that your test brings in addition to other reports that they're prescribing. So I guess what I'm saying, okay, I've got back to the question again. Thanks for your patience. What other tests might functional med docs prescribe in addition to yours, let's say?
Good question. To set the stage for that, the answer on the first page of the report, it shows you that 85% of the diseases that we get sick and die from are worsened by poor cardiometabolic health.
Okay.
Right. So there's a ground. It doesn't matter what you're trying to get better. Yeah. If you address cardiometabolic health, it's going to help. Right. So that's a huge one. In terms of ancillary testing, each of the 10 primary factors that we use to create the cardiometabolic index, and those would be atherogenic markers, inflammation, oxidative stress, metabolic, fatty liver, et cetera. There's 10 of them, and we generate an aggregate weighted risk score that is proprietary. It's not validated specifically, but it's a guide, if you will. Each of those has a list of ancillary tests for each marker. So if it's fatty liver, it will tell you, hey, if this is elevated and you want to do additional research on yourself, here are some other tests that might be appropriate, right? So it might be a liver ultrasound, or et cetera, et cetera. So that is an attempt to not just leave them stranded with, here's what I think, have a nice day. It's here's what I think. And this really, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is how I approach everything with my patients and with my practice. I want to empower you. I want to give you the keys to you. And I'm happy to help. But unless I give you the keys, real change is not going to happen. So throughout the report, I bend over backwards to explain how things are connected, how they affect each other. And as an engineer, I throughout all the research, I tried to distill it down. If you could only have one marker, right? What would it be? And if I could only have one marker for you that I wanted to know as much as possible about your cardiometabolic physiology, it would be insulin resistance, right? But it gets more interesting, because the traditional marker for insulin resistance is called HOMA-IR, homeostatic blah, blah, blah. But if you read the science, HOMA-IR, just like LDL doesn't really, it's not the cardiovascular marker we were told it was. It doesn't, if you just look at LDL, quote unquote, bad cholesterol, you know probably 30% of your heart risk, right? And so LDL is not the way to assess atherogenic risk, right? So there's this thing that the American College of Cardiology in 2023 had their annual conference, and they came up with this blockbuster announcement, and it was this: hey, guess what? We're super smart. We figured something out. Inflammation matters, right? So CRP, C-reactive protein, has a huge impact on your risk for heart disease. And all of us in the integrative community were like, that's like 2 decades old, But because the American College of Cardiology made the announcement, it was this wonderful spreading of information. So with regard to heart disease, what I try and focus on is I'll give you the lipid panel. You'll see your LDL, your HDL, your total cholesterol, so that your primary care doctor can make sense of your numbers in his frame or her frame. But there's this thing that is known as residual risk, right? And that is, if we screen for LDL and we eliminate all the things that we thought mattered, what's left that's making the difference, right? And that's 2 things that I found. One is remnant cholesterol. And if you listen to Dr. Peter Attia, he's big on remnant particles. ApoB and remnant cholesterol correlate very tightly. I could add ApoB to the panel, but my goal with this panel was to keep it affordable, because the end goal, the 30,000 foot goal, is to make this something that anybody and everybody can afford to do and see where they're at. And then the even better part is to have a 1 or 2 capsule solution that hits 80% of the problem for people. And that's where that citrus bergamot, wild Sonara artichoke, they're so pleiotropic that you may not cure a condition, but you can make it 38% better, which on the aggregate makes a massive difference when you're talking about 93% of the population, right? So as an engineer, I want to do as much as possible with as little as possible. And that's really underpinned the development of the report and the test. So,
Yeah. You know, it makes me think of a conversation or a text exchange I just had with my brother the other day. And, you know, we have family history of you know, heart disease, diabetes. And, you know, he's on a kick, right? A health kick. And he's working out lots and, you know, he's not seeing the results that he's hoping to see. And he's like, what the hell? Here's everything that I'm doing. And, it's like, why am I plateauing at, you know, 200 pounds? Right. And I was like, send me your 3-day food journal and send me your workout plan. And it's like, oh, actually, before you even send me that, what's your sleep like? 3 to 5 hours. Like, I don't need to see anything else. Because we talk about inflammation, right? And it's like, wow,
cortisol.
Yeah, there's like, and I, you know, look, can fall into being that cortisol junkie, man. Like, and
Me too.
yeah, and I mean, it's counterintuitive, right? Oh, like that's really one of the things that I learned from sprinting is the effortless effort paradox, right?
Yep.
Wait a minute, do less. Like literally, would do 1 workout a week with Garnet, and I got the result that I told you. It's like, how does that happen? And well, I think it has a lot to do with that key thing that you pointed to is inflammation. And, you know, I want to talk a little bit about that as it relates to, you know, environment. And I'm not asking you to take a political stance, but something that, you know, always was just, you said painfully obvious. Yeah. You know, C-reactive protein 20 years ago. Yeah, we knew. Right. You know, when I started, and that's the kind of the blessing and the curse of sport, right? Is like everything you put in your mouth, like you're like, is this going to make me throw up later? So like because you did an ultra sensitive, right? And
yeah.
And I became, you know, I went to a point, this would have been like 10, 15 years ago when I'm like, you know, people would accuse me or label me as being like orthorexic. That orthorexic is when you like overanalyze everything you eat, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, well, if I eat these things and they make me throw up in my afternoon training session, like I'm going to ask what's in this. Right. And, you know, what I've seen, and, you know, thank goodness for the fact that, you know, my wife is a holistic nutritionist, because I was, you know, molecular biochemistry was a little too high tech, less holistic, less high touch. And I was like looking at, you know, ratios and micronutrients, and forget about the fact, you know, like everything to do with synergy that comes from, you know, whole foods. Like, actually,
right.
I remember when I taught nutrition as part of one of my teachables in my previous life as an academic. I wasn't trained in nutrition, but it's just biochemistry, right? And like,
yeah.
But I remember reading about meat factor protein, and I'm like, what? Meat factor protein? What the heck is? Well, meat factor protein, we don't know what it is, but it helps you absorb iron more effectively. So, you know, there's all these kind of like powerful, like you're talking about supplements, where it's these powerful solutions, these synergistic solutions that come in the form of the whole food. Like, well, what are we hearing a lot about now? It's like, well, seed oil is the devil. It's like, well, okay, seed oil in its original source. Like if you eat a sunflower seed, you'll be okay. But if you ate sunflower seed oil, you know, extracted at these crazy high temperatures that denature the molecule, and then devoid of all the anti-inflams like your vitamin E, et cetera, that would have come in the whole food, now you're in trouble, right? And so, like, what's your thought on that? Like an environmental kind of, I know you're not an environmental scientist, but like, it's kind of like, let's put our environmental scientist hat on. Like, are there some things that are so obvious that we're ignoring and not talking about?
Yeah, it's like the fish in the fish tank that
Right.
the water is, needs to be changed, but they don't know because that's the water. God, man, that's a great question. I would say personally, and I'm not a political person, but as a country, as citizens of the US, we're living in a household where the parents are fighting daily and the kids are just like, what's going on? Right. So there's this deep, unsettled angst that it's got to be affecting us. Right.
So
And I'm not
you're just talking about stress, right?
exactly right. So it's, and early in my career, I did a lot of work with adrenal dysfunction. Right. And the analogy I always used to use is when thousands of years ago, stress was episodic, right? You're on the plains of Serengeti, the lion shows up, you're either going to get eaten or you're going to get away. But
Right.
one way or the other, the stress is going to resolve. And now we have all these teeny little lions around us all the time, right? So if I had the answer for stress, well, there are answers for stress. I mean, exercise, right?
Yeah. Well,
There's
so, sorry, I just want to add there's the stress also, but then there's also, where do you get the clean food sources? Like my wife commented yesterday, she's like, 'cause she has this whole algorithm that she runs when she does grocery shopping, where it's like, okay, well, here's a local butcher, and here's like the true organic shop, Whole Food shop, and
right.
like Whole Foods isn't Whole Foods anymore. The organic section of the grocery store isn't anymore. And she's like, I could only go to the grocery store, and it's like, I went to the milk aisle, and the only milk that was there was like on the bottom shelf, and everything else was plant-based forever, right? So, it's just like, do you see like the food? Is food? I guess is the question that I'm asking.
I think
to the stress. Yeah.
I think your question really speaks to the primary issue, at least in our country, is that our food supply and our healthcare are controlled with financial incentive, right?
Yeah.
And God, somebody said something, you probably heard it. They're like, I went to the supermarket and there was a health food section. And it made me wonder, what the heck is all the other section? What are they? Are they not healthy?
Right. Right.
So as I said earlier, I'm apolitical to the degree that I can be. I do have, and I'm a little naive by nature, but I do feel like essentially, or not essentially, but very much in this country, the financial interests associated with sickness and the profit associated with sickness is massive. Doctors don't make any money off of healthy people. And there you have it, right? So we're spending 73% of the money on, the profit, 73% of the global profit in healthcare is coming from US, and we got 4% of the population. And we're it's just a joke. It's so bad that it's like people can't even see it because it's so bad. So hopefully there are improvements on the horizon where they're going to disrupt the collusion and the profit motive that's making us and keeping us sick. I don't know, right? But I hope.
It's interesting, by giving people access to presumably objective data about their self, and presumably caregivers that can help them interpret it and ask the right questions. You get to a better definition of what healthy is, right? And then you get to, well, the protocols that would ensure you would maintain that. And you're not beholden to really good marketing, right? I remember, last time I saw these, young girls, morbidly obese, overweight, and, and they were trying, like they were in the quote unquote health food section, and they're looking at what ice cream should we get? And we're like, well, let's get this one. It's plant-based. And I'm like, man, like, dang, like they got you, right? And I've been, tricked by that too. And so, I think again, it's this kind of, I always thought I was crazy, and it stemmed from that kind of, what did I call it? Orthorexic, right? Like wanting to know what's in our food. And I mean, it's a little on the nose today. It's like, I just got a, call from a friend today who's, teaching, healthy approached this day in high school, and she asked me to come in and speak, and I was like, yeah, I mean, this is a really big issue because I think most people don't know what healthy is because, well, I'm not sure that it's really taught in the school systems anymore. We are so fortunate to have gone down the rabbit hole into our molecular biology and biochemistry, and it's a beautiful symphony, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but then isn't that then our job to make it easier for people to understand and action? Because we're having this conversation, we're the top 1% in terms of access to information and wealth and knowledge. And it's like, okay, cool. How do you scale that? Right.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, we're way over in food security and accessibility, but it's the same problem for functional medicine, right? It's like, okay, how do you, that notion of everybody has their own kind of landscape of vulnerability. It's like, do you get a vision of like how that might scale?
I do. And I think it boils down to the 80-20 rule.
Right.
And I learned that in sales, actually, the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your revenue usually comes from 20% of your clients, but it applies. I forget the guy who figured it out, but it applies throughout. Who was it?
Pareto principle.
Yeah. And that's how I'm approaching this subject and this big, massive issue is 80% of the damage is being done. And if you just change 20% of the lifestyle, health, physiology, you could leverage that and make a significant. And that's why cardiometabolic became more and more obvious because it affects almost everybody, right? And it affects almost every morbidity. And so if you're going to pick one thing to work on, why not pick on the one that has the chances of greatest impact, right? So the other thing that I've always known, my uncle was a cardiologist, right? And I grew up thinking medicine is, godlike and these guys are brilliant. And now we know that that's not the case. They're very smart people, no doubt about it. To get through med school, you can't be dumb. But the system, the philosophy in medicine is broken. And it's all about reductionist theory of, you go to a kidney doctor to get your kidney fixed. What about the rest of the body that caused that kidney to have problems? So my uncle, brilliant cardiologist, spent almost 50 years putting people on statins to help with heart disease. And we now know that for primary prevention of heart attack, a statin has an NNT, a number needed to treat, of close to 400. So if somebody doesn't have any high-risk heart stuff going on and their cholesterol is high and you put them on a statin to lower their LDL, you would need to do that for 400 people to prevent one heart attack. Yet, there's a whole history behind statins and when they were developed and some faulty science that got taken up. And once the financial inertia gets rolling in medicine and in any industry, it's really hard to slow down. And so that's why we have LDL on our test, and it's worth knowing your LDL, but way more important to know your remnant cholesterol, your triglyceride glucose index, which is the marker for insulin resistance, and your inflammation. If you know those things, you'll really have a much better handle on your risk for cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, stroke, right? Because I'm 60, and now the one thing I am probably most fearful of is stroke, right? Because you have a heart attack, that's not great, right? But you have a stroke, you can live for another 30 years and have really poor quality of life. So cerebrovascular Alzheimer's, we now know, is referred to as type 3 diabetes, right? So it's all connected. And as an engineer, I tried to boil it down to something that you could communicate in one sentence, and it boils down to muscle versus bread. And so for every cubic inch of lean muscle you have an advantage in terms of maintaining glucose homeostasis, right? Of handling blood sugar. Handling blood sugar is everything that matters. All the downstream stuff of mishandling blood sugar is what causes us disease. So lean muscle is crucial, right? Because when you eat a meal, 85% of that glucose in the meal is intended to be absorbed into lean muscle immediately. So if you don't have enough lean muscle, you're at a disadvantage. Now, bread is simply a stand-in for starch, sugar, carbohydrate, right? And carbohydrates are not inherently bad. It's just that the way we eat carbohydrates is dangerous because we can get all the bad stuff with none of the good stuff if we're not paying attention. So muscle versus bread. and I think that helps when people can distill it down to something very, very straightforward. So
Yeah, you say, yeah, carbohydrates are bad. Complex carbohydrates are bad. It's just the way we're accessing them is very different than our ancestors did, and frankly, we just have not evolved fast enough to keep up with the changes in industry, right? And I really can appreciate the power of carbohydrates. When is well, you cut them out entirely, and then you put them back in, and you feel like Superman. It's like, whoa, like that. That's something. I mean, like really, it's this whole, as you say, is you eat the carbohydrate and the glycogen gets pulled into your muscle, and it's like, wow, you have like this like turbo engine all of a sudden, and and athletes leverage that. Like triathletes, they do this thing called carbo loading. Bodybuilders do it; they'll deplete and then they'll fill their muscles with, and I haven't validated this, but I don't think it's a far stretch to say that. Well, that's why you would grain finish cattle. Right. Grass fed versus grain finished. It's like, yeah, I just like 20x the volume. I filled the muscle with sugar. Yeah. People don't necessarily realize that their muscle is a really good storage source for sugar.
Well, and it's not only that they're a good storage source for it, they're mandatory. They're if you're not putting it into the muscle, it's floating around and it's going to the liver and getting deposited as fat.
Right.
And it's causing, what do they call them? AGEs, advanced glycation end products. They float around and cause havoc. So getting sugar rapidly and properly absorbed into the muscle is critical. And you got to have enough muscle to do that, right? Yeah. So I saw a study just yesterday, the day before, that if you do 10 body weight squats every 45 minutes throughout the workday, just 10. I could do that in 20 seconds maybe, or whatever. That was the equivalent metabolically of a half-hour walk.
Yeah.
And it's because you're activating the quads and the glutes and the big muscle groups, right? And those are the guys that have the most bang for the buck in absorbing glucose from the bloodstream. And doing that right after a meal is massive.
Yeah.
If you can do 3 to 5 minutes of moderate intensity exercise immediately after a meal, you drop the glycemic peak in a big, big way.
Yeah.
And those little tips are right on page 3 of the report. There's the Cardiometabolic 10. It's like all this free, beneficial stuff that anybody can do. And if they just did it incrementally, they would improve their health.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's something to be said for, demonstrating how easy it is. And then I think the missing piece is like, how do you make it socially reinforcing? Right? Like, how do you still reinforce it? Because, it's like, well, should wellness be in the workplace? Should I be doing that every 45 minutes? And what if I don't want to do that? Like, so it's like, there is this notion of sedentariness.
But it's funny. One of my patients a couple of weeks ago, Qualcomm is a very big company in San Diego, where I'm at. They have about 10,000 practitioners. A large demographic in the Qualcomm population is from South Asia. They're Indian, Pakistani, some of the best engineers in the world come from that part of the world. That part of the world also has a deleterious phenotype, and it means they're not obese, but they don't have adequate lean muscle on average. This is the way the body presents in the genomics of that part of the world, where you'll have relatively narrow legs, a little bit of a pot belly. So if I were to look at you, I wouldn't think you are obese and at risk for cardiometabolic disease, but these are lean cardiometabolic patients. They just don't have enough muscle mass to manage blood sugar. They're not obese, but they're oftentimes worse off metabolically.
Yeah.
The diabetes in India is huge, right? And it's all muscle mass.
Yeah.
So, sorry, there's so many tangents.
No. What's the thread to making fitness socially accessible?
I think the thread is, and they do it at Qualcomm. That's what my patient works for a company that works for Optum, and they just do fitness classes.
Got it. Okay.
And these people get they get credit through, on their insurance if they just attend one of these classes. If they just show up,
Right.
it's beneficial. So I don't know if that's socially reinforcing, but it's financially reinforcing. And United Healthcare proved a couple of decades ago that if you just give somebody $20 a month to go to the gym, it actually moves the needle.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So I honestly, if I could, I wouldn't want to have full control, but if I did, I'd make good food free.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'd say wherever you're starting genetically, we know now that epigenetics is a massive player, right? Your genes are important, but you can modify the way they express themselves, right?
Yeah.
So no matter where you start, if you can incrementally move the needle, and that's where genomics testing, is really interesting in tandem with cardiometabolic testing.
Yeah.
We're going to reward you just for moving the needle.
Yeah.
Right? With most pre-diabetics, if you can lose 7% of your body weight, you can stave off ever developing type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if socially, but financially it has been proven to work. And it's the ROI on that is massive. You think about the cost of diabetes. I think lifetime type 2 diabetes is over $100,000 per person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in terms of, again, the pulling the thread more on the social responsibility side of it, and the bigger picture in terms of how, let's say, advanced diagnostics and at-home testing can improve public health outcome at scale. Now, there's making a lot of assumptions here, and that is that. So where I'm going with this is, well, I have to start with my own home. It's like, oh, okay, well, what if we made this a part of our family operating system? You know what I mean? It's, we get a series of protocols that these are the things that we're checking in on. And, the same way that we consult with a financial planner, you work with like a, functional med doc, as your kind of health planner, and you kind of do like a quarterly assessment, and you're like, okay, here's a 20% that's going to move the needle for the 80%. And, how do you get that, in the home, I guess. And this kind of pulls on the motivation to, well, assuming you have a healthy family and you like each other and you want to live a long life as we do, it's like, okay, well, how is this something that, is discussed, regularly, where it's like, oh, hey, Dad, like me, let's say, I want to be 20 pounds overweight to, see that the engine light's on, so it's like something, you say, hey, I'm concerned about you, or, is there a specific set of biomarkers that we check in on, quarterly, annually, whatever. And just like, and I think we're gonna get there. And it's like, okay, cool. What's the first one? Okay, well, we tried the scale. That didn't really work. Why not? Yeah. But I do see it, kind of, at least in my own household, centralizing here.
Yeah, I think probably the most significant, if you just ask somebody to lose weight, that's like they need a map, they need a compass.
Yeah.
You're telling them to go on a journey, but not how to get there, right?
Right.
And you can cut calories all you want, but it depends on the calories, right? It depends on even something as simple as food layering, or what resistant starches are, right? So if you make pasta on Tuesday and refrigerate it overnight and then reheat it on Wednesday, you get 40% less glycemic index. And that goes for all the starches, potatoes, etc. Those little tricks, I'm always astounded because I'm so deep in this stuff, but I'll talk to a layperson and I'll give them a few of these pearls and they're just like, oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. They have no idea because medicine doesn't make any money from resistant starch.
Right.
And that's the problem. We got to find a way. Functional medicine, thank God, when I first started, I started studying it in 2005 when I was in school, and nobody had heard of it except the guru that taught me. And now a lot of people, there's a lot more awareness of functional medicine, and people are sick of being sick and they're looking for alternatives. Right. So the way I'm trying to facilitate that groundswell, as a functional medicine doctor, I will prescribe a test and it costs me whatever it costs me. I generally mark it up to cover my expenses, right? And then there's a consult. So my goal is to make it as inexpensive as possible for a functional medicine practitioner, whether it's a wellness coach or a DC or a DO or whatever. Give them a low barrier to entry tool.
Mm.
And that's what this test really is. It's an affordable way to really deliver an impactful experience to a layperson.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have to, I mean, some of the best tests that I use, $400, $500, $600, $700. And that screens out 90% of the people that need it, out of pocket. So my test our test has been structured and designed and engineered to be cost effective. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, okay.
That's-
But I think there's maybe one, let's say one more question before the final questions is with, people like you who are engineering systems, problem solvers, entrepreneurs, what's the opportunity for folks who may not necessarily be in health, but the health industry would benefit from their way of thinking, right? So what I guess that's my question is, what would your advice be to a career change, somebody who, is a really good problem solver, is like, hey, we kind of need you in your health. Like, how would you help them make that jump as an entrepreneur?
So to move into this field,
Yeah.
I think, oh man, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I have this conversation with people all the time. One of the most underserved areas of health is women's health. Okay. And that's because medicine is male dominated and has always been male dominated. And, Halle Berry was at the Capitol last year, I think, announcing a $285 million initiative to improve women's health, right? And they did a survey as part of the run up to this funding. They surveyed a ton of gynecologists, and they found that only 30% of US licensed gynecologists had any training in menopause.
Well, yeah, that was her thing, right? Is making menopause.
Right.
Menopause, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing, like, nobody addressed that because most of the docs were male and they didn't know what perimenopause felt like and menopause felt like, but they did know secondarily what it felt like. And if they were smart, they would have lended a hand years ago to help their wives and girlfriends and partners feel better so that the entire household could benefit. But here we are, right? So when I talk to somebody, and I just had this conversation yesterday, one of my neighbors is a patent researcher. She's thinking about law school, and she's in her mid to late 30s, I think. And she's like, God, what you do sounds really fascinating. And I'm like, you know what? You could do it even, I don't want to call it a side hustle, but Evexia, right? Evexia has a capability where a non-licensed practitioner can order labs, and Evexia provides the signing physician that takes responsibility for those labs. And there's a test called the Dutch test that I use all the time that is fantastic in terms of assessing female health at any stage, particularly around menopause. And here's the one thing about the Dutch test that no traditional gynecologists do. It measures the 3 metabolites of estrogen, the good, the bad, and the ugly, we call them. So the good is 2-OH, it's protective estrogen metabolite. The bad is 16-OH, which is just highly estrogenic. But the ugly is 4-OH. And every woman's different. She metabolizes estrogen differently. And if she has elevated 4-OH metabolite, you know this from biochemistry, that is DNA damaging, or not cytotoxic, but genotoxic, and it enhances your risk for breast cancer significantly. So wouldn't you want to know?
Yeah.
Right? And if you have elevated 4-OH, you can just take DIM or eat cruciferous vegetables and help move that metabolism back to the protective. So if I was a female who wanted to do something in health, I would just learn how to do Dutch tests and help all my friends to find out A, their risk for breast cancer and how to fix it, and B, how to minimize the damage associated with menopause. It's hard to go through menopause without support physiologically.
See, I love how you just drilled that down to like the one thing.
Yeah.
The simplicity on the far side of complexity, which is like, I mean, that's an art form. And what a great segue into if this was your last podcast, what would the one thing be that you just have to say?
Understand insulin resistance. That's what I would say. Understand it, because it is the key. It's the cornerstone to cardiometabolic disease, which is the cornerstone to most major diseases, chronic diseases. So figure out, really understand what insulin resistance is, and sensitivity, whatever you want to call it, is all about. And it's muscle versus bread, right? To oversimplify it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so who needs to hear this? I mean, I've got to guess. But
93.3% of the population.
Right, exactly. Cool. And then my last question, my favorite question to ask is, if you could nominate anybody, who would you recommend for the show?
I have a couple ideas. One of my mentors he's a functional medicine doc up in San Luis Obispo, and he's just one of those guys that was just born to do it. And his name is Dave Marquis.
Dave Marquis.
Yeah, and I'll connect you to, because
Awesome.
he's the kindest, he's got wisdom coming out his ears. So yeah, he's great. He's who I aspire to be from a functional medicine perspective. So,
the Godfather.
Yeah. Yeah, he's awesome. He's awesome.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll look forward to that introduction. And just finally, before we head out here, Steve, how do people find you? How do people find Cardiometabolic IQ? Or Cardiometabolic.
So
sorry, that was
I know. That's a marketing gaffe.
Yeah.
I put the IQ there and highlighted it for a reason, but people don't know what to do with it sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
So the website is cardiometabolic with a Q.com.
Cool.
That'll tell you a lot about what it is, what it does. And then there's a info@cardiometabolic.com is an email that will find its way to me. That's probably the best single source place to go. I have a functional medicine website called doctorsfunctionalhealth.com, doctorsfunctionalhealth.com. I still do functional medicine, not as much as I used to, but that's my website for that kind of stuff. If they want to work with me, they're welcome to. So
amazing. I will put all those details in the show notes so folks can readily.
Thank you.
We've traveled with Dr. Stephen Bennett from the frustration of seeing fragmented care to his vision of holistic participatory medicine. His story reminds us that health isn't something done to us. It's something we must claim, question, and co-create. The conversation today offered not just insights into insulin resistance or cardiometabolic health, but a model for how to translate complexity into clarity, empowering people to take the smallest steps with the biggest impact. As you leave this episode, I challenge you to ask yourself, where is your map? Who is your guide? And how can you become the architect of your own health journey? Dr. Bennett's example challenges us all to look deeper, ask better questions, and take responsibility for the one body we get to live in. Because the journey to health is personal, and yours starts now.